97.3 ESPN.com Sixers insider Michael Kaskey-Blomain joining us on the phone line. The ironic thing that happened yesterday was that he posted an article saying the Sixers need to shut down Okafor, and then a few hours later, the Sixers take his advice and actually do shut him down. So, Mike, we know you actually have a little influence, right?
I guess so. The funny thing, Josh, is that's actually the second time that exact thing happened this season.
Happened with Embiid, too, right?
Yeah, it was within 24 hours that I posted a very similar story about the Okafor one yesterday to, how they just needed to shut down JoJo at this point. And I think it was that was posted on at night, and the next day they announced that he was done. So, hopefully maybe somebody listening to us a little bit.
So let's get into this situation with the Sixers. Now you have Okafor down for the season. Covington shut down for the rest of the year. He has a slight meniscus tear, which seems to be the injury of the Sixers for the last 2 years. At some point, is this team just the most unlucky team in the NBA?
Yeah, I think, I'm sure we'll talk about it. I think it definitely goes a little bit beyond luck at this point. But it's certainly, luck plays a huge factor in that, especially with something like the Ben Simmons injury or the second Embiid injury, things that just seem to be, really unfortunate and kind of freak occurrences that just keep stacking on top of each other. So, I think they safely have the title of the unluckiest team in the NBA right now for sure.
Do you consider Jahlil Okafor a bust, or is it still too early to tell?
It's honestly tough. I wouldn't throw the bust label on him. I think that he probably will never quite live up to the expectations of being drafted third overall. That's not to say that he can't have a solid, productive career. I don't see him projecting towards superstar or potentially even all-star status. And I think when you're drafting that high in the draft, especially for the Sixers at that point, who are really looking to acquire stars and building blocks to build on, I do think that he will fall short of those expectations, and that will certainly lead some to label him a bust. But as far as his potential in the league, I think it's too early to tell. This season was really just a wash for him. He was never after the surgery he had last March, he just never seemed to be the same. He was in and out of the lineup, missed games due to injury, missed games due to just being benched because of the log jam. So this season, basically, you didn't really get to see much from him at all. So I think it's kind of a lost season for him, and I think next season will be, whether or not he's on the Sixers or elsewhere, I think next season will be very big in determining his future in the league.
Mike, I've contended that Okafor just doesn't fit this team. This is a guy who is your old-school traditional postman. Brett Brown likes to run that, make the extra pass, keep the ball moving, players moving, the ball moving, offense, the Spurs run, and I don't think Okafor fits that offense. I think he needs to be on a team that will utilize and his skill set better, and that I just don't see a future for him in Philadelphia. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree, Josh, especially the way the first couple, years of his career here have panned out, and, the other players on the roster already that play, a similar role and position. I tend to agree with you, especially about, it's a good point you made about Brett Brown's style of play. It's, he's obviously molding kind of a little bit of the Spurs, Warriors, up-tempo, move the ball, extra pass, pace and space, that style of play. And, like you said, that's really just not conducive to the skill set Okafor has. That's not to say that skill set wouldn't be used elsewhere. There's a lot of teams, that could use a guy like that. Obviously, the Pelicans were interested in him before bringing, in DeMarcus Cousins. There's some other interest teams like the Pacers or the Thunder who utilize, a lot of bigs, I think. So there's a market for him, but I just think, like you said, I think that's not in Philadelphia with the way that the team plays and with the other pieces, already on the roster.
This may or may not be a fair assessment, but I'm going to present you an argument, and you tell me what you think. I look at every move that's happened from the Sam Hinkie era, okay? Whether it's the draft picks, Okafor, Noel, Embiid, all these guys. You look at the trades. Some of them haven't even materialized fully yet. We're still waiting for the Michael Carter-Williams and the Kings deals. Those are deals that were so down the road that, we're going to be waiting till almost 2020 till we see the full fruition of those deals. But up to this point, I would argue that the greatest move Sam Hinkie did that has materialized has been the Dario Saric pick, because it's more than just the fact that this guy has been the only guy who's been on the floor consistently. It's also the fact that it's almost like his style of play has changed the attitude of this team from being basically resigned to losing to going out there and fighting every night.
Yeah, absolutely, Josh. I agree with that assessment completely. I think he obviously made several good moves that, like you said, not all of them have panned out. It's sort of difficult to label one, maybe the best, but the Dario, his addition this season, like you said, especially since Embiid has been out of the lineup, he's really kept the team and the fan base afloat. I mean, if he wasn't playing these games, there would be, I couldn't blame anyone for not wanting to watch the roster, other than for him. And, like you said, his style of play, it's a great mix of, kind of the flash and the move toward today's NBA with a point forward and a guy that has the vision. But he also just has that toughness and that grit that obviously, Philadelphia people just gravitate to. He hasn't missed a game yet this season. He plays hard. He plays inside. He fights every night. And combining that with his skill set is just, it's a perfect fit in Philadelphia. I think, Sam, at the time that he drafted Dario, was very aware of, the mix that he brought to the game. And obviously with a couple years of seasoning overseas in Turkey before he came over, I think really helped his game. He never really looked like a rookie once he kind of got accustomed to the NBA style of play this year. He just looks like a professional basketball player, a guy that's been doing it. And I think, like you said, he's really kind of charged up and motivated the Sixers team to kind of get through the second half of the year. And I'd be lying. I had expectations for Dario. I was excited for him to come over, but I think, me and most people, I think he's definitely surpassed what we expected from him in his first season in the league.
Do you think that he has surpassed those expectations that you mentioned because you maybe overlooked him because everyone was so focused on Embiid and Simmons? Or do you think the expectations were legitimately lower than they should have been?
I think it's a combination of both. I think a lot of times when you have a guy that's, not coming from the American college program, it's automatically tempered expectations because there's been so many, international guys that have been drafted high and touted, as being the next this or that and have never really quite panned out. So I think anytime there's a foreign guy that people in America, unless you're an NBA scout, you probably haven't seen, or, someone that writes about the game, you probably hadn't seen much of Dario at all. And then even after he was drafted by the Sixers, the access that what you had to see him, do for 2 years was limited. So I think that there's just a natural reaction to temper the expectations there. And then, coupled with the fact that, his skill set was kind of an unknown and it wasn't sure that exactly how it would transition to the NBA. That has been smoother, I think, than, people would have expected, at least, me personally expected. I think he just quickly kind of was able to grasp the differences between the NBA style of play and what he had been accustomed to in Turkey. It took him a couple of weeks. He had his ups and downs over, the first month or two. But I think once he really got acclimated to the style of play, it just kind of became second nature to him. And, I'm really excited at this point to just watch him develop further because if he's surprised us to this point and what he's already been able to do, since Ersan's been traded in his increased role, I think it spells like a lot of promise, obviously, for the future going forward.
We're talking with Michael Kaskey-Blomain, our 97.3 ESPN.com Sixers insider. You can follow him on Twitter at @TheRealMikeKB. Mike, I've heard the argument for Rookie of the Year different directions. I've heard, during the week, with Mike Gill on the Sports Bash, you hear from guys like Mark Jackson, Sixers pre- and post-game analyst, who says Dario Saric, Rookie of the Year all the way. You hear from someone like Alex Kennedy from Hoops Hype, who says that Joel Embiid absolutely should be Rookie of the Year, is sensational talent. You hear from people on TV like Rachel Nichols on ESPN saying that Joel Embiid is the Rookie of the Year and there should be no argument. You hear other former players on ESPN talk about how Joel Embiid shouldn't win the award because he only played in 31 games. Saric has to win the award because Saric is the best rookie in this year. You hear other people bring up Malcolm Brogdon. Who do you think should be Rookie of the Year?
I think it's Joel. He was just so much better than everyone else this season. It's obviously unfortunate the way his year ended, but when he was able to play and what he was able to do, it was, there's no doubt that he was the best rookie this season. And I think, we obviously don't know how his career is going to pan out, but one way I like to look at awards is if you're, in the future, if you're going to look back on a season or an award, I think you want the award to be an accurate, reflection of what happened that year. And when it came to rookies this year, Joel Embiid was the story, of the season. He was, head and shoulders above the competition, as good as Dario's been. And obviously he's the, in my mind, the second place guy. And he'll be, if it's not Joel due to the, people saying that he didn't play enough game, it will be Dario. But I think, you can't talk about the rookie class this year and the excellence of it without talking about Joel. It would be unprecedented, obviously, due to the number of games he's played. But it has to happen sometimes, and there was no one else that was nearly as dominant, for what he was able to do. So in my mind, it's Joel. I'm not sure that, the voters will necessarily see it that way, but if I had to vote, that's where I'd be going.
And, of course, in NBA history, the player with the least number of games played to win the Rookie of the Year was Patrick Ewing back in the 80s. We only played 50. So Joel Embiid obviously would rewrite the record book in more ways than one in that sense. Looking over at the NBA as a whole, Mike, you look around the issue with the NBA with the players resting. There's people arguing on both sides of it. It seems to be a much more modern issue than previously. But you compare that with the Sixers, who they're resting guys for actual injuries versus teams around the NBA who are resting players just for the sake of resting them for a playoff race. How do you feel about this issue?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something that's become, really prevalent across the league today, and it's something that I think needs to be addressed. And it's ironic. I'm certainly not the first person to point this out, but like you said, I think other teams are going about resting in a more egregious manner than the Sixers really ever did. Everything that they really did, it was strictly injury related, not necessarily just rest related. Where some of these other teams are either, teams like the Lakers that are obviously trying to hold on to their draft pick and not send it over to us, or, shut guys down for the year, Dang and Mozgov and Brandon Ingram, he was back last night, but he just missed the past 4 games. So it's definitely becoming, I think other teams are even more so egregious than the Sixers. But, in general, I think the players need to play. Obviously, there's certain exceptions, certain games, and certain players. But in general, I think it's definitely something that the league should and will address with, changes to the schedule, whatever that may be coming down the road. But it's something that, it's not a good look, obviously, for the league. I don't think to have, some of their best talent really just resting if they don't need to. Obviously, when it's at the very end of the season, as it is now, with only a week or 2 remaining, obviously teams are focused on the playoffs. You need to do, what you can do to get your team in, in the best possible physical condition to make this, the playoff push. Not necessarily talking about that, but in general, I think, players should play. And I do think it's a little bit ironic that, some of the other teams have kind of gone under the radar with what they've done as far as resting players. Well, the Sixers were kind of the target for many years for that.
It's funny. You look at how much the NBA has changed. Wilt Chamberlain in 61-62 averaged 48 and a half minutes a game. And there's only 48 minutes a game. He actually played every minute of every game that season. And in today's world, you have guys sitting because they need rest. Kevin Durant says that, the grind of the season is hard and it's mentally taxing. And I think it's kind of funny, Mike, because I think there's this massive disconnect. I don't know if the players fully understand that part of the reason why they're making as much money and they have the lifestyle they have now is because the NBA is a TV product and it's a multi-billion-dollar industry.
Yeah, and that's going to be the issue. Obviously, if players are not playing on these, these primetime games. There was a game a few weeks ago on Saturday night, primetime ABC game with the Spurs and the Warriors. And obviously both teams sat basically their entire starting fives, and it was a game between the 2 benches. And in a situation like that, especially, there's commercials all week, from ABC, hyping up to it. and that's where the league's getting its money from. The new CBA and the collective bargaining was so much of the money was based on the new the TV agreements coming in going forward for the next several years. So eventually, I don't think it's got to that point yet. I think Adam Silver obviously realizes that it's an issue and will do something to address it. But it's definitely something that could end up, affecting the bottom line of the league. And I think Adam Silver said as much in his memo that he sent to the owners that, it's kind of almost a slap in the face to, the fans and the sponsors that are kind of giving the players this money to, have this and then to not sit. And especially when it's done in that manner, when it's like an entire starting five, or when, the Cavaliers rest LeBron, Kevin Love, and Kyrie all at the same time, I think that's when it becomes an issue. I'm not saying that, these 82 games in a playoff push, it's tough. There's certainly a night where a guy might just need a night off, and I do think that's fine. But then to couple that with, the two other best players, and then to do it frequently, I think is when it really becomes an issue. And, if it's not addressed, it could, I think, certainly end up affecting the bottom line of the league, which is, really come so far. I think the popularity of the NBA is, as high as I can remember, at least, in my lifetime, since at least back in the 90s when Jordan was, dominating. I think right now, just with social media and how many games are on TV and how many stars there are in the league that people, can know and recognize, that the popularity, it just seems to be, really exploding. And I think to have an issue like this clouding over it is certainly not ideal.
Before I let you go, who is your MVP pick and why?
It's Russ. It's been Russ all season. I just think, no disrespect to any of the other candidates, I think LeBron could obviously be an MVP every single year. The 4 that he has, I think, is not even enough to really represent how good he's been. And it's not even the triple-double specifically, even though I think at this point we're almost undervaluing that. My whole life following basketball, I've had conversations with people about, what if a player averaged a triple-double? That'll never happen. I thought maybe LeBron could have been that guy when he was first drafted, and he was always close, but he was never quite there. It's just after Durant left, the expectations of that team were, there was people saying they weren't going to be in the playoffs, that they were going to be really bad, and they retooled a little bit. They have some pieces, but if you take Russ out of that lineup, they are just not. They're not a competitive team. I don't think in any manner. He has them, right in the thick of the playoff race. I think they're 5th right now. They're competitive against, that game last night against the Spurs. They ended up losing, but they were, in control and in charge of that game the whole time. I think whoever they face in the playoffs, even though they might not win, they'll be a competitive team. And I just think there's no comparison to the level of energy that he brings to the floor every night. Him and Harden obviously both have not missed a game this season. We were just talking about rest. I think that goes a long way toward both of them to show that. But, Russ, he reminds me, I think other people have said this, but, obviously as a Sixers guy, the energy he brings reminds me of Iverson. He's obviously built, better so he can do, I feel like he's what Iverson would have been if he was a few inches taller and a little bit stronger and heavier, because he's just fearless, man. So, I've been a Russ guy for years, and I think it has to be him this year. That's my vote.
Well, if Russell Westbrook wins the MVP, he'll be the first NBA MVP in league history whose team is not top 4 in their conference when the playoffs start. So that would be history along with the triple-double. The real Mike KB, you can follow him on Twitter, Michael Kaskey-Blomain, or 97.3 ESPN.com, Sixers Insider. Mike, appreciate the time today.
Thanks, Josh. It was good to talk to you, man.